Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. Since its launch in 2019, the Turing Way has evolved from being an online handbook and guide on open and reproducible science to a thriving community with hundreds of contributors across different countries. This growing community is held together with regular events, like for instance the twice-a-year book dashes, the last of which we had in June 2024, as you will hear a bit later. On top of all of that, the Turing Way also influenced and inspired other projects, like for instance the Environmental Data Science book and lately the NASA Transform to Open Science project. So how did it come to all of that? And what does it take to run a community-led project like the Turing Way? To find out, I met with 4 contributors of the Turing Way, Patricia, Herterich and Sarah Gibson from the original team, as well as Malvika, Sharan and Steele, who joined a bit later and helped the Turing Way to enter its next phase. And of course there is the founder herself, Kirsty Whitaker, who I had the pleasure of talking to in an earlier episode of this season. So let's kick this off with a conversation I had with Patricia, who I met in person for the first time at the Collaborations Workshop in Coventry in 2024, where we also celebrated the 5th birthday of the Turing Way.
So I'm Patricia Herterich. I am a librarian by training and have done library-related work in open science for about 10 years now. I'm currently Chief of Staff for OLS, formerly Open Science, Open Life Science, which I think also have been on this podcast. And I'm doing that part-time, and I'm a freelance consultant in the rest of the time, where I just wrapped up working with the Software Sustainability Institute, and I chaired Collaborations Workshop 2024. That was my last freelance project.
Yes, indeed, and I was there, and I saw you, and you masterminded that
And
beautifully.
thank you.
You were also at the birthday party that was held at the Collaborations Workshop for the Turing Way, weren't you?
I popped in for 2 minutes before I was called to troubleshoot problems in other sessions. But yes, I made a point of showing up. And I think I walked into the room when Kirsty highlighted that there were people in the original team that are in the room. So I kind of walked in just at the right time. But I missed most of the cool things, but I grabbed some cake afterwards. So
That is the most important thing, isn't it? In a way. So you were there from the beginning. You were one of the original contributors.
Yes, I was part of the original core team that got it off the ground, I guess, back in, long time ago, 2019. Yeah, we're celebrating 5 years.
So how did you get into it, and why did you get involved in the first place?
I met Kirsty ages ago at the very first Mozilla Working Openly workshop, what was back then the Mozilla Science Lab, where they introduced their open leadership curriculum. And that's the program that basically OLS came out of and is now continuing. And back then in 2018, I was working as kind of a research data librarian at the University of Birmingham, but still keeping in touch with my previous job, which was at CERN. And one of the folks that I worked with at CERN worked on my binder. He was running the original binder hubs and had some money to run workshops in various countries. And I offered Birmingham as the UK location. So I kind of brought the first binder workshop to the UK. And Kirsty then at that time was starting the thinking about the Turing Way and some other projects with that money. Yeah, we got in touch around that binder workshop. And then when she secured funding for the Turing Way with the binder aspects in it, she was looking for people that then could actually join the project team and do the work. And because I had kind of the knowledge around the working openly and creating it as an open project from knowing the Mozilla open leadership. And I had an interest to work more openly again, because one of the interesting things, if you're like a librarian in the open research space, is you preach a lot, but you don't get to do a lot of open collaborative
Okay.
working.
Mm.
So that was a nice opportunity. So yeah, I basically said I'd be happy to be on that team if Kirsty is happy to have me. And so I ended up being on the core team.
I didn't know that you actually were at CERN.
Yeah, I've worked at CERN for 4 years before coming to the UK in the library team, the Scientific Information Service, it's called. So I worked on Inspire, and I was on the team that created the CERN Open Data Portal.
Anyway, we digress. So back to the Turing Way. My binder plays what kind of role in the Turing Way?
I'm not sure what role it plays at the moment, but back then it was kind of what my binder does is an easy way for you to capture your computing environment for someone
Mm.
else, and they just have to click a button and they can run, I think back then mainly Jupyter books. It can do more advanced things, and if Sarah Gibson was here, she'd correct me because she set up
Mm.
the infrastructure. But because the Turing Way was about reproducible science, and my binder was basically an easy way to teach people how to work reproducibly on a smaller scale, we brought that in as a practical, here's the theory of how to work reproducibly, and we teach you version control. We taught a lot of Git and GitHub in the early Book Dash events, I guess, and how
Mm.
people make their first pull requests, their first contributions. And then my binder is basically if you have a script, if you have that in place, this is how you would make it easily available to someone
Mm.
else, and it's reproducible. They can play with your code and your data. We brought that together as a hands-on thing that
Mm.
people can really do to make their research reproducible. And at the start of when kicking off the Turing Way project, Sarah Gibson started setting up a binder hub at the Turing Way. So it was also this is open infrastructure, and institutions like the Turing Way that have the capacity should put some of their staff resources actually behind that and support that. So Sarah built a binder hub, which is kind of the infrastructure that little binders sit on. This
Yeah.
is like the worst description ever for anyone who actually understands computer science, but
Yeah.
basically the thing that jumps into action when someone requests that to look and interact with repository that is captured in my binder. So we kind of built a little bit of infrastructure. We
Mhm.
taught people how to use the tool, and then we wrote the Turing Way book and built the community around it just to spread the word.
Yeah, and that's the bit that I'm interested in as well. How did you go about it? How did you spread the word? How did you start building a community?
So one of the things that I really like about the original Turing Way core team is that it felt like it was one of the first projects that actually brought people from various professional roles together to collaborate.
Mm.
So I'm a librarian, and then there were like a lot of research software engineers on that team and people from that background, and folks like Kirsty, who came from the classical research background. And it felt like the first time that it was appreciated that if these professional roles come together and work on
Mm.
something, it's better than if everyone does their standalone thing. So I really love the Turing Way for that, to actually show what happens if you bring all the expertise together. And I think that also allowed us to start spreading the word in various communities, because
Mm.
we had access to research data management community in the UK. So a lot of people that are sitting often in libraries. The research software engineers had their network. We went to big conferences, like big library conferences, and said like there are cool things that you can do if you go out and
Mm.
find those other people at your institutions. Also, I think helped that we embodied the kind of the spirit of the Alan Turing Institute, that it's
Mm.
made up of other universities. So we were spread around the UK. We weren't all like centrally in London. I was in Birmingham. There were folk in Sheffield. We had some folk in Manchester. So we basically could host local events across the UK and attract the local community there. We had people from various professional additional roles that could go out and talk to their peers. And I think like that, we started just spreading the word and just making sure we connect with other initiatives. I think the UK Reproducibility Network just started out back then, so we made sure like we talked to them. That's where we started back then. And then Malvika did some magic when she came in as first proper community manager and took it to a whole other level.
So how was the reception then at the beginning?
Initially, I think like people just thought it was pretty cool. It was a nice resource. It was one of the things that brought information together. And also, we always said that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If some of the chapters in the original Turing Way are just a collection of really good links to other resources, that is fine, but someone has to start to curate those links and bring those together. And everyone said it was useful. No one said like, well, that exists already. Everyone could kind of see where the use was. We started doing those book dash events really early on to actually say, you can contribute. We really actually need you to contribute to make this better and grow this. And I think that helped a lot for people to see it as a community resource and not just something that this core team has done and will keep on doing, but it's actually from the very start was like, we gave you something as a starting point because someone has to start somewhere, but we immediately opened it up for other folks to contribute and showed them how to. And I think that was very successful. So people felt really welcome to a project. They felt that they had their small successes in getting first pull requests in, making a few changes, and being acknowledged for any contribution they're making, no matter how big or small it is. And I think that was pretty new to a lot of people because often you don't get credit just because you went in and fixed a few typos. And we made a really big point of, no, you learned GitHub in a day to get to that point and made your first pull requests. And that is absolutely amazing. It might be just a few typos, but we now know that you can go away and you know how to contribute to things on GitHub. And that's the actual success that we wanted. And less so if that is an immediate contribution to the Turing Way, but just people have the confidence and the additional skill, understanding of how the open ecosystem works. And the fact that it's now a huge book with a lot of really, really useful content is a bonus, but that's not actually what we necessarily set out to do.
Being open to contributions and inviting people from different backgrounds and disciplines was a key principle right from the start, as Patricia just said. And this concept of interdisciplinary work was quite new to people, and I suspect still maybe in a few places. The value in the book also lies in the fact that it proactively invites people to contribute, and by doing so, teaching them some of the best practices that we encourage in science projects, like version control and code reviews, to name but a few. It's all about learning by doing. All of that was made possible through the use of technologies such as Binder and Jupyter, which brings me to Sarah Gibson, who some of you may know from her work at 2i2c and Jupyter Hubs. Sarah has been an active member in the research software community for quite some time. She's also, like Patricia, an original contributor to the Turing Way, and as Patricia already mentioned, helped to build the necessary technical infrastructure for it. I met Sarah at the Collaborations Workshop, like Patricia this year, at the Turing Way birthday party, and after wiping off the birthday cakes we both ate, found a moment to chat to her about her work on the project. So here's Sarah.
Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Peter. Once again, I am here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a conference.
There's a Sarah.
There's a Sarah. But not about Jupyter so much. Maybe a little bit.
A little bit. We can get into all of that. It's more closely linked than I think a lot of people realize.
We're here in this final birthday session. Well, not in this final, in the final part of the birthday session about the Turing Way. And it would be good what your involvement in that is.
Yeah. So yeah, the 5th birthday of the Turing Way, and I have been in the Turing Way project since it started and was here at Collaborations Workshop 2019 when we launched the book 5 years ago. And I was a very new RSE. I was fresh out of my PhD into my first job at the Alan Turing Institute, and the Turing Way was the very first project I was put on, and I thought, this is going to be great, because I knew nothing about research engineering practices at that point. I didn't even know what Git was, and I didn't even have a GitHub account. I was just like, and the Turing Way is like being pitched as this handbook for reproducible research that was going to go through version control and testing and continuous integration. I was like, these are all the skills I need to learn to do my brand new job. 3 months on this project and I am going to be a whiz. And then in came Kirsty with her own ideas and said, actually, I'd quite like you to hang out with these binder people and figure out what they're doing and like learn this binder hub technology and learn about computational reproducibility and cloud infrastructure and all of this. So I was learning Git at the same time as Kubernetes, and let me tell you, that was rough.
I know.
Yes.
Exactly. It's difficult to get your head around Git when you're new.
I still don't think I have my head around Git, and I definitely don't have my head around Kubernetes either 5 years in. But yeah, this was my pathway into the Binder project and ultimately Jupyter Hub, which is, as Binder is a sub-project of Jupyter Hub. And I remember Collaborations Workshop 2019, we were launching the book. I'd already had a discussion with the Binder team members.
Yeah.
This is also the end of my paid time on the Turing Way project, so I won't be hanging out much anymore. I'll have other projects to do. And I got a message from Tim Head while I was at Collaborations Workshop being like, well, if you're not going to do Binder at the Turing anymore, would you like to help us run the biggest binder in the world? And that's when I got the keys to mybinder.org and officially joined the Jupyter Hub team. And I've been there ever since. And it's kind of like shaped, as your avid listeners who have heard me speak before will have, pieces are falling into place. It's like shaped my whole career. Whereas like now deploying Jupyter Hubs and binders, it's my day job now. It's what I do.
And that is the link to the Turing Way book. That is because it is actually...
It's a Jupyter book, which is an opinionated wrapper. At the time, it was an opinionated wrapper around Sphinx, which is a very popular documentation builder for Python, to kind of bring notebooks, but specifically interactive notebooks, and like render them as HTML on the web so that you could not just like see the outputs of a notebook on the web, but you could actually make it interactive and play with it without having to like be taken somewhere else. And that was powered on the back end with Binder. So yeah, Jupyter Book was this new technology at the time as well, and that's undergoing a big renovation at the minute.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, a lot of work in the back end and a lot of community building work as well. Shout out to Angus Hollands, who is another hire at 2I2C we have, who is specifically working on Jupyter Book and the MIST Markdown format, which is the format that Jupyter Book uses, and like going through the whole rendering engine and everything to like really slick this project up, and we get to ingest that as a downstream project to the Turing Way and reap the benefits of all that hard work. So thanks very much, Angus.
Yeah, I was about to ask what's next, but I mean, that is next.
Yeah, that is next for the Jupyter Book project. And now I'm working in the infrastructure working group where we're thinking about how do we bring these kind of changes downstream into the Turing Way. A couple of big things that we did this year was that we moved the GitHub repository into its own organization, and we got a specific domain URL for the book as well. So we're thinking about avoiding link rot. A lot of the presentations people have given about the Turing Way over the years have like the Netlify URL in, and if we decide to not run on Netlify anymore, all those links will break. But because we have a custom domain name, we can point that at whatever platform we're using to build. All of those presentations will continue to have working links. That's the kind of thing we're thinking about in the infrastructure working group for the Turing Way at the minute. And now, because we're in an organization, we don't need to have this gigantic monolithic monorepo anymore. We can start breaking things down and making it a bit more accessible for people to navigate and find the part of the community that they can contribute to. There's so many other ways to contribute to the Turing Way than writing in the book, but please do write in the book.
Let me introduce you now to another key player in the Turing Way, Malvika Sharan. Malvika started at the Turing Way a little bit later in what we might describe phase 2 of the project. Phase 2 because the Turing Way has gone through a period of rapid growth, and how much of that changed the project itself is something that can be seen, for instance, at the Book Dash event that happened recently in June 24, as Malvika explains in the following interview.
Hi, Peter. I am Malvika Sharan. I am a senior researcher for the tools, practices, and systems, and I am a co-lead for the Turing Way.
How did you get involved with the Turing Way? Because I believe you've been there from the beginning, haven't you?
Almost the beginning. I'd been following Kirsty on social media, and I saw her tweets on the Turing Way being launched and that they were organizing the first book dash in May 2019 that I applied for. And I was exactly at the Alan Turing Institute attending one day book dash. And it was really great because I could talk about or write about some of the things that I had been working on. And then I got involved slightly as a volunteer, but it was until later when I reached out to Kirsty for being my mentor during a Software Sustainability Institute fellowship period that we exchanged ideas on different projects that I was working on. And I was planning to move to the UK anyway at the time. So Kirsty offered me to come and work with her, and I did. And I have continued to work with her since then. I was initially a community manager for the Turing Way,
Mm-hmm.
and then I started to co-lead the project, taking on senior researcher position later on. And I started to build a team of community management related professionals at the Turing Institute, which built really strongly on my own experience as a community manager in the Turing Way and previously at the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. The Turing Way has become a fundamental resource for us to do the work that we do as community managers, as researchers, to advocate for different kind of roles, to advocate for best practices around open science and reproducibility, and to also ensure that the AI technology that we're building at the Turing Institute builds on open, collaborative, and ethical practices.
The one thing that I heard from that was a book dash, because we're facing another book dash at the Alan Turing Institute, I believe in July 2024.
Yeah, this is the 11th book dash, and this is very exciting period because when Kirsty and the team had organized book dash, the community was very small. The core team probably had 10, 15 people. Most of them were SSI fellows. Now the community has over 450 direct contributors to the book and thousands of people on our Slack workspace. And the book dash is actually completely led by community this time around, very nicely facilitated by Steele, who's our community manager, and the Book Dash team is being chaired by Esther Plum in New Delft, and also with the team members Ariel Bennett and Emma Caroon. So this is really delighting to see because this is no longer led by a few people. This is really led by community now. So this is a very celebratory period for us. And as we talk about the fifth year of the Turing Way, we are headed to a very decentralized governance of the book.
So what is a book dash?
The Book Dash is a bi-yearly grand event that happens at the Turing Way, where community members who have collaborative ideas to improve the book, to improve chapters, to improve processes, to lead conversation with the community, they come together and have that celebratory space. So it's not just about creating chapters, but really having that moment of celebrations, creating that really beautiful sense of belonging and joyful space to work together. So people are international who are in the Turing Way, and the book dash happens in a span of a week, where people can join us across different time zones, work with us few hours every day. And at the end of the week, we do a community share out where all the community members, even though they have not contributed during the book dash, can listen in and celebrate the true collaborative work that people are doing. And then Book Dash is also very generative. People go out with very new ideas and they come back with those ideas and work throughout the year with us outside the Book Dash. So Book Dash is a really good space for two things. One, to finish doing what we might have been doing and put it in the book, and to start something new that we haven't had the space to have conversation on. Initially, it was in-person event, but due to pandemic, we completely moved online, and it was actually a lot more inclusive because we could then work with
Mm.
people irrespective of what time zone or geographic location they might have been. And now the next phase hopefully would be that people are organizing their own book dash. Currently, we do host local hubs, so
Uh-huh.
people have hosted local hub in Netherlands, and we also have local hub in London and sometimes outside London. But yeah, I think that's the area of work for us to think about in the next year.
Is that what you expected when you started with the
No,
Turing Way?
not at all. I think my hope was that we can provide enough resources and practices that people can feel empowered about data science. And of
Mm.
course, we wanted to do it with the community, so we knew that we want to do it in the open. But we could never have predicted what the community will become, or if at all we will continue to have community support, or that the Turing Way will become so well known and recognized. One of the highlights for me last year was that I was part of NASA TOPS community panelist,
Mm.
and we were advising on the NASA strategy for Transform to Open Science 5 years program. And one of the initial projects that they were working on was the Open Science One-on-One.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our community members were involved as initial subject matter experts. And if you would look at the final product that is in the Open Science 101 website, a lot of them feature the Turing Way chapters and Turing Way images and things that people have written. And I hope that our community takes pride on informing these kind of resources that would ultimately become really important for open science knowledge building.
So, what do you think is the aim of the Turing Way?
So when I define the Turing way from the community perspective, specifically, when we talk with our community management group or different people who are building community in different spaces and want to take inspiration from the Turing way, we talk about the community development happens in phases. In the
Mm.
beginning, when the Turing Way book was being created, the community focus was to involve community in writing something that can be published as chapter. In the second stage, let's say when I joined, we wanted to scale that number of chapters with the number of people. So engage more people into writing more chapters. And these chapters always translated into practices. So we didn't want to write practices that the small group of people thought are important, but to learn from the community about what they think is important and support them in writing those practices as chapters. In third stage, when we brought in Steele as community manager and I took on the leadership role, we wanted to focus on governance because our chapters were over 150 or 200. And we said we can stop focusing on that because we understand now that community has the right pathway to do that without our support. But where the community would struggle is to identify what is this project? Where do we go? Who do we talk to? Because there were more than 300 people who were authors
Mm.
of the book. And then we had lots of issues and pull requests being opened every day. We had a Slack channel where there were a lot of noises. So we really needed someone who could work at the grassroots level, which Anne did really wonderfully. So she has taken on the challenge of identifying what people were working on in the community, surface that, and help make things like working group. So we now have actually working groups in the Turing Way
Mm.
community. And now we are headed to the fourth stage. And the fourth stage is how do we actually build cohesiveness? One thing to say that different working groups can be created and they can do the
Mm.
work that they feel are important. But at the end, they all have to make sense for the bigger vision of what Turing Way is. So going back to your original question, what do we want to achieve? We would still keep our moonshot goal to make reproducibility too easy not to do, and then give enough space for people to think, how do we get there?
Mm.
So of course, we have now 5 guides that hopefully someone might have introduced in this podcast and the community handbook. We have really gone into how do we sustain this community, how we ensure that the work that we have built actually survives for another 5 years, and that the resources that we are building is actually meaningful and useful for the community. And I have to say, with AI becoming a buzzword and
Mm.
important thing where everybody needs to learn about it, Turing Way is very, very important because there are two ways to look at it. One is that if there's a learner or educator or anybody who needs to know about the practice can learn about it. But second is to build this culture of ethical development of technology.
Yes.
So the Turing Way really follows that, and the practices that we are mimicking in the Turing Way community should be taken on by anybody who wants to build a community like this outside around a technology or tools or resources that is around ethical AI or ethical technology.
So, as Malvika just said, the Turing Way has transformed to be a community project with contributions from across the globe. And being invited to help with projects such as NASA's Transform to Open Science, or TOPS, where the Turing Way is helping with the Open Science 101 program. But with a growing community of users and contributors come the additional challenge of keeping it all together and maintaining the community spirit. Malvika referred to this as the third phase in the Turing Way. And as she said, Anneliese Steele was brought in to help the Turing Way in this important transition. So in the last conversation for this episode, Anne and I talk about how the community that grew around the Turing Way can be kept together and grow even further. So here's Anne.
My name is Anne Lee Steele. I'm the research community manager for the Turing Way project. So much of my role, especially in this kind of 3.0 version of the project, has been about ensuring the sustainability and of the community, of our governance structures, of our kind of processes in order to enable us to go into the next 5 years after the first 5 years of the project. I'm excited to talk to you about that.
You've been with the Turing Way for how long now?
It's roughly been since March 2022. So I think that it's been maybe a little bit more than 2 years now.
Oh, wow. Okay, but you joined during the pandemic then?
A little bit just after. And actually, maybe that's an important point to flag because so much of the project actually grew from this 2019 to 2022 period, which meant that it overlapped so much with the early years of the pandemic and the pandemic lockdowns, which we know had huge effects on so many things. But one of those was the way that it affected digital first communities, open source communities, for example, like the Turing Way. And I kind of came in towards the tail end of that kind of like lockdown, online, in-person kind of period when we were really kind of starting to switch back to in-person. Yeah, which was a really, I think, interesting time to see how communities like the Turing Way really adjusted to this change as a remote first community.
So what exactly is your role, and could you describe what you're doing there?
Yeah, so community management really takes on, I think, a different set of standards or goals, or even the job description kind of really changes depending on the community that you're working with. And community management looked really different at the beginning of the Turing Way as opposed to kind of its growth as a community, and now it's kind of sustainability and maintenance. And that's really where I came in. So after 3 years of intense growth from 2019 through 2022, when I came into the community, we were really at a stage when we needed to talk about what does maintenance of our community look like? What does sustainability for our organizational structures look like? Taking a lot of cues from the essay, The Tyranny of Structurelessness by Joe Freeman, which talks about the way in which kind of informal structures shift how we make it really difficult for organizing groups to continue because people aren't sure where they fit in, and all this informality creates a lot of chaos and confusion. With all of the rapid growth that we've gone through in the years before I joined the team, it was really, really clear that we needed to be setting up structures to ensure our sustainability. And so a lot of my focus over the past 2 years has been on exactly those things. I'm an anthropologist by training, so a lot of my thinking and way of interacting with the world and with folks is just starts with conversations and talking with folks about what they're doing and really starting from that point, like starting with where people are. And so my first 6 months were really structured by what I now call a kind of like community research effort, which is really just ethnography by another word, which was conversations with, I think, 30 plus folks in the community, writing a weekly update with things that were coming up, questions that I had, themes that people were talking about, like needs that they had, things that they were interested in doing, projects that they'd gotten started, the history of the project. And all of these conversations over time really showed the need for formalization. And after that first 6 months of community research, which also was very much a trust building exercise, right? That I was here to stay, that I was here to help.
You were the
And
new kid on the block, so
I
to
was the
speak.
new kid on the block, totally. I
Yeah.
was an outsider to the community, right? That
Mm.
came in when was somehow expected to manage it, whatever that might mean. And so the next year after that point was really an experiment in what does formalizing look like within the community. And so mimicking in some ways some structures that we've seen in sort of parallel environments, we started formalizing what was already there. I'm
Mm.
thinking particularly of a group of folks within the community that were working on translation and localization efforts, specifically led by Batul Almazouk. She and a couple of other folks, Andrea Sanchez Tapia, among them Melissa Black, who joined later, and Alejandro Coca Castro, who were all a part of this initial kind of push and leading a kind of a sub or parallel community of folks that were translating the Turing Way into Arabic, into Spanish, into French. I think there was a group translating into Japanese, into Turkish, into Mandarin. Like all of that was kind of happening, but there was no like kind of official structure that was formalizing them. And so we kind of said, hey, maybe we can
Mm.
formalize into a working group or a team, really recognize the work that you're doing, and then see if we can support it in real time and see where we can, as staff members on the project, really support the work that you're doing. We also trialed 2 other types of working groups because we'd also seen there was an increased number of staff from the Turing side of things that were also seconded or had a part of their job description to contribute to the project. And those 2 working groups focused on like reviewing, editing, training folks, maintaining the resources. And then from there, actually, that experiment resulted in working groups that emerged over time. So we also, some successful ones, some failures, learnings in every iteration. But eventually what manifested was what are now 3 different working groups currently within the community. The translation and localization one, which really kind of kicked off
Yeah.
the process. We have an accessibility working group co-led with Liz Hare that really is in the process actually right now of releasing a 6th guide on accessible practices, which is very exciting and has really changed a lot of our internal structures in order to be as accessible as possible to as many folks as possible. And then we also have a infrastructure maintainers working group led by Sarah Gibson, Jim Madge, Danny Garside, and Bridget Schipholz.
That's quite a lot, actually. And it's funny that you mentioned the Joe Freeman tyranny of structurelessness. And I have read the paper a while ago. The danger of not having any structures is that, as you already alluded to, that we see power structures building informally, but not really being visible and transparent. I think the kind of structures that you're putting in there, what do they actually look like, and how do you ensure the transparency for the community and, that it's clear that who should they go to and who's responsible for what?
That really hits the nail on the head. So much of, I think, what it's translated into is maybe being much more explicit with what does and does not sit with different groups, to recognize that there are even like power differentials. Some may come with institutional association, some may come from freedom to act or make decisions without institutional association. All of those things are different types of power, right? And my role, I think, was to, and has been to, one, create documentation that ensures more explicit transparency around what decision making looks like. It's also translated into creating spaces where these tough conversations can happen. And that's manifested as a community calls throughout, I'd say, late 2022 to the end of 2023, which kind of morphed into a community forum. It's begun in 2024. And that's also manifested as like really dialing in what my role is in this kind of landscape of power differentials. So like the community manager role, interestingly, has become, and the research project manager role alongside me, it's really become clear that our role is to facilitate the kind of information pipeline across these different levels. That means at the leadership level, that means at the working group level, that means at the community member level, to make it clear what's happening at each level, and facilitate decision-making actions that they would like to take, kind of be a conduit essentially in these different spaces. It's really been something that we've actually actively kind of tried to really define in real time within the community, because things like sustainability and maintenance are questions that I think all open source and all open communities are really facing right now. And it looks really different depending on the community that you're working with. And for us, a lot of what governance has looked like has actually been a version of trial and error and seeing what works for us as a community.
Making processes transparent and building structures that give community members a fair chance to contribute are cornerstones to keep a growing and increasingly diverse and distributed community like the Turing Way together. It's an evolution that many open source and open science projects had to go through, and transitions like that aren't easy. And errors are being made naturally, as Anne alluded to. It's interesting that Anne also mentioned the essay by Joe Freeman, The Tyranny of Structurelessness. It's not the first time this article made its appearance in this podcast. In fact, one of the very early episodes on team structures with Fabien Lamarck from March 2021, called Who is Pierre Bourdieu, we also talked about the importance of transparency in organizational structures and power distributions. All of which marks the beginning of phase 4 of the project, as Malvika mentioned. And to help put structures around this transition, there are a set of guides in the handbook itself, ranging from a guide on reproducible research, over guides on collaboration and communication, to a guide on ethical research. And so the Turing Way continues its journey into the next 5 years. What it will look like at the end of that, who knows? But to say it with Sarah Gibson from earlier, the Turing Way may have become much more than a handbook, but please keep on writing for the handbook. So as we reach the end for this episode, I would like to thank the Turing Way and the Alan Turing Institute in the UK for the time, patience, and kind support. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya!